read. We're at an interesting point. The, the Supreme Court has said two really good things. One is that the federal government can have the carbon tax it's got, and that it's not even a tax. As we've been saying all along, it's a fee on emitting carbon. So we win. Now, we've been saying that for years, so we're really happy. And I presume that means that the two classes of, let me use a technical term here, idiots who disagree, the ones who don't think it works, and the ones who don't want it, are going to shut up or at least be a lot less effective for a while. What we have is what we have advocated for many years, which is a steadily rising carbon tax. So what's next? That's really the big question. And okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation we're in. I'm going to then start to talk about what we should be targeting, what our goals should be after that. And I've divided that into three pieces. There's three immediate demands that I think that are really easy. They're already basically our policy. They're not explicitly enough our policy, but they're there. And they're very important. I'll talk about what we can do personally for a while. And then I'm going to talk about how we pick a few political targets. Because as a party, it's absolutely crucial that many voices say the same sensible thing about something that is politically feasible, something that we can do quickly politically, and something that we can implement and will have an impact. Now, those are three different criteria: politically feasible, implementable, and having an impact. And, you know, there's an awful lot of smart people in the Green Party who have their favorite items that they know they're important or they know they should be done. But as a party, when we're all clamoring for different things, we don't actually have much effect. And talk to any set of groups, and there are 37 things or 412 things that we all want. Well, I agree, almost all of those things are great. Which ones are we going to focus on is the question I want to ask, and why? So in that third section, I'm going to give you my ranking and justification for it, and then leave it up to you to decide whether I've got the values right, because I can move them around. We can move them around, and ideally, we would agree on whether or not this can be implemented or that can be implemented, whether the governments we're going to face in the next 2 years can be pushed in this direction or can't be. You know, it's almost unimaginable that we'll get the Liberals to say, all right, guys, we're going to eliminate the oil industry as fast as we can. And we all know that's a target. We also know the Liberals aren't going to say that, so it's not implementable in the short run. Those are the kinds of things. What can they do, though? What can we expect to get? So let's go on. What's our situation right now? Well, we as a country have relatively low targets. We've been criticized for having lower targets than we should. We're very large emitters. We're planning to, if we actually achieve what a previous prime minister promised, will be 30% below the 2005 numbers. Harper was not very ambitious. He never intended to reach those goals. Maybe, I actually believe that Trudeau thinks he can reach those goals. He just hasn't got a plan for doing it, really. He has no plan for the 70% that's left for the following 20 years. None. A hope that the carbon price will be extended, a hope that sometime in the next year, his committees are going to come up with some practical steps. So what are we going to target? It seems to me that we have a situation where we can have some impact, partly by making it seem like certain things are more popular and acceptable than others, partly by repeating the ideas that they seem to have little trouble getting their minds around. So I want to note that the 30% emissions that the current Greenhouse Gas Act also includes international emission credits. And it also includes changes in the land sector and in forestry. Those are completely fakes. Buying emissions from somebody else doesn't reduce emissions. So part of what they've built into this, besides we're not going to get to a reasonable level, is that we plan to fake our way for the last 10%. That's really what I think it says. And it's very clear that even if every country that's made promises fully implements them, the IPCC says we won't stay short of 2 degrees. There's no way with the current international agreements, including Canada's, that we're going to meet that imaginary target of 1.5 degrees. Now, what's the implication? Well, we've had pretty significant climate change with 1 degree. We're looking at 2. The science is now telling us that this isn't a linear process. The climate impacts for the 2nd degree of rise are going to be higher, larger, perhaps much larger than they were for the 1st degree. Everything we emit in the next 10 years stays in the atmosphere for the whole 50 ahead of us, and a lot longer. Okay, well, I find that depressing. I hope you do. Let's take a look at where we are. We're actually 13% above the emissions level in 1990, right? And that's happened since the year 2000. The country is emitting approximately 730 megatons. You know, I don't know how many elephants that is. I should have gotten that wonderful graphic that shows each ton is like an elephant falling from the sky. Have you guys seen that? Well, 730 megatons is a lot of elephants. It's a lot of elephants. Not a ton, megatons. A megaton is 1,000 tons, 1,000,000 kilograms. Now, let's take this personally. That means each of us is responsible for 19.4 tons. 19.4 tons of carbon emissions. That's quite a bit. That makes us the 7th worst in the world. And that is 4 times the global average if you're thinking about this in terms of any kind of carbon justice. But I want to point out one thing about this. Only 18%, less than 20% of those are direct household emissions. There's only 20% of that 19 tons that we have direct individual control of. So I want to list basically 3 targets that I think are just dead giveaways. One of them is, I think we really should be saying, raise the carbon tax faster. Raise it a lot faster. We know that if we had it at $200 a ton now, we'd have a decent chance of making that minus 30% by 2030. If it was at $200 a ton now, that's what the models tell us. We're going to get to $170 by the time that we're supposed to have gotten to 30% reduction. I would say this, nobody has to defend the carbon tax. The argument's over. The science is clear, it works. The only question is whether it's high enough, and the answer is no. So I think in dealing with people, you just don't even seriously consider discussing whether it's a good policy. It's a bad policy because it doesn't go far enough. That's the only statement. 30% is too low for safety. Our current levels won't get us there. Let me just back a step and see if I missed something. Nope, that's it. So target 2 is half of our scheme. Actually, it's the largest part, is a charge on fossil fuels for consumers, on fuel, on natural gas, propane, and so on. That's what we call the carbon tax. But a chunk of it, about 10%, is a regulatory trading system. And what do we mean by that? We mean this is imposed on the companies that are large emitters. And in theory, and the theory is right, if you designed it really well, that regulatory scheme, the output-based pricing scheme, would protect industries from foreign competition by companies that are not subject to a carbon tax. It would save jobs in Canada, but it should only be applied to one category. And this is a small category of our industry. They've got to be trade exposed, and they've got to be emissions intensive. So the exceptions for using natural gas or coal in generating electricity, well, they're certainly emissions intensive, but they're not trade exposed. We don't, go get electricity at the supermarket from Japan. Those are exceptions that are hidden. And there's a reason for hiding those. And it's because otherwise industry would be complaining. There would be industries that would go out of business pretty quickly if they had to face the taxes, the full tax. Among those are all the gas generation plants in Ontario. Now, they're only our peaking support. They're not a big part of our electricity. Among those are the gas plants that back up our hospital electricity and heat, the heat for hospitals. There's a bunch of cases here where we've got leakage. So the system of free allocations, which is politically motivated and not in theory terrible, actually leaks. It's really costly to administer. I should show you, I really should show you that the incredibly complicated flow charts that the federal government has put out for each industry. Do you qualify? If you qualify, how much? If you qualify and we know that you're in this range, then how much do you have to pay? Do you get a rebate? Are there ways around it? This chart takes a whole page just to follow through all the questions you have to ask. Now, one of the things about that is it means that somebody in a government office has to be reading those for every single industry and seeing if they apply. For each company in each industry. And then somebody in each of those companies has to be reading the same thing, figuring out exactly what it means, working out whether or not they've actually got the measurements right. And then someone else has to come along and make sure that they actually did what they said they did. And then maybe we've got some extra cost at the court level. This is actually a terrible regulatory system. I know it's the one that the conservatives prefer. I think you have to understand it as a job creation scheme rather than a carbon regulation scheme. First of all, it means that some businesses that would go bankrupt are kept going when they shouldn't be. And secondly, it means lots of bureaucrats and technicians get hired. It's not very accurate. It's hard to get the numbers right. It discriminates against some industries because if I give Patricia extra credits because she's going to suffer, well, that gives Patricia an advantage over Fred or Tree. And this is all hidden. It's not at all transparent. some bureaucrat and some technician negotiate over those details. And of course, there are unjustifiable exceptions. They're just literally unjustifiable, but they're hidden in this process. So the whole thing is far less effective than a border adjustment tax. Okay, so my suggestion is that, yes, it works, but it works really badly and it's more expensive. So we say this is junk. As soon as we can get rid of it, we have to get rid of it. Third point is that we should be calling for a border adjustment tax. All that's holding it up right now is political nerve. The Americans are talking about it. The Europeans are talking about it. Japan is, I think, talking about it. We have people in the federal government talking about it. So all it takes is some spine. It's legal. The weight of legal opinion is that it's okay. It's fair. It's cheaper, or at least no more costly than this mess that we currently have. It has a political advantage in that it puts pressure on other countries to bring in carbon taxes. If they implemented it in a direct and simple way, rebates for consumers would go up. Right now, there's these industries, the rebates for consumers are basically diverted back to the industry. And the other thing is that it's actually a lot easier to keep track of because you're only keeping track of costs at the border. Okay, so let's go back to what you guys are responsible for. Andy, pay attention, because this is what we're blaming you for. You have promised, in effect, according to Mr. Harper, to cut 5.24 tons of emissions from your personal account. And your wife, Janet and I together have to cut 10.5. Of course, there is a little problem here if we were responsible, and that is our total emissions, all of our total emissions on average across Canada are only about 3.4 tons. We do not have enough under our direct control to make a dent in the problem. That's really what that says. So anybody, and I think this is really worth saying, personal action is nice. We should be doing what we can. It cannot do much. The numbers say it cannot do much. Anyone who makes this a moral question or a question of individual responsibility is fundamentally wrong numerically, doing a kind of blaming and shaming that is absolutely immoral, and working for companies that don't want to take on the responsibility. Anytime you hear someone suggest, we should do that, people are so wasteful, Canadians consume so much. Not that that's not true in all sorts of historical senses. It is fundamentally irrelevant for dealing with the problem. So you can be an absolute horrible person consuming who knows what. Changing your lifestyle isn't going to make much difference, even if you could convince everybody in the country to make the same changes at the personal level. We cannot ever let our focus be on personal decisions. And there's a lot of individual targets. Let me give you a list, okay? We could put in solar collectors. We could install home batteries. We could stop eating meat, take shorter showers. Haven't you heard that one? I hope you've all heard it. I feel guilty about my long showers every 2 weeks or something. We can try to recycle our plastics, compost. You can get a hybrid. I mean, this isn't a complete list. It's already a long list, and I just spun this out. Only a few of them have any quantitative impact at all. I've put stars on them. Let me just show you which ones. If you're taking an airplane ride, well, just going to Toronto emits 1.3 tons. So a flight to Toronto really adds something to your household consumption. If you go to Vancouver, 1.39 tons. That's one person and flying economy. But you could go business class and it wouldn't increase it appreciably. So go business class, splurge. 1.39 tons, well, you're getting up to 4, over 4. A person who makes 3 round trip flights to Vancouver in a year has basically doubled the average of emissions for Canadian households. Because that's a pretty big one. It's a pretty big one. It's not as big as household heat. I just worked out the numbers for my own household, 2 people in it, and about 2.5 megatons, or tons, sorry, metric tons, from just heating our house and heating our water in a year. That's each, by the way, 2.5 tons each. We're reasonably efficient. We keep our thermometer down to 70. Well, I don't know what the number is now, but we keep it lower than average. I wear sweaters and scarves at night when I'm working. That is a pretty big one. That's a problem that we need to focus on. And that is actually the largest single target for individuals, except it can't be solved by individuals because I need a heating system. And 36 million other Canadians need a heating system, and a large fraction of those are tied to gas systems right now. That's a collective problem, not an individual one when it comes right down to it. Private vehicles are pretty bad. Private vehicles, 2 tons a year for the average driver. Notice that's most of the average drivers, most of the average Canadians spending or emissions are actually vehicles and heating. The next up, one of the big 4 here is actually food. Now, food accounts for about somewhere between 10 and 30% of people's carbon footprint. So let's just consider an average. What this graph shows is more than half of that for the average household is just the effect of meat consumption. Some people don't like the idea of meat consumption because you're out there killing other creatures like ourselves. Some people don't count cows and chickens as anything like ourselves. That's not really the issue. 56%, 75% of the arable land used goes to meat consumption. So it's our biggest single household, well, food emission. And it's also responsible for the biggest part of human land use. Human land use is what's causing the great extinction that's underway. That red really should be read, not for red meat, but as a warning that this is a chunk that's causing more environmental damage than all the rest of our food system. But let me point something out. If food is only 20% of the 18% that each household emits, and if you cut off all of that meat, or cut off half of those emissions one way or the other, the total impact would be how much? About 0.35 tons per year. It's really small. So I moralize a lot about meat. Some of you know I've been campaigning away on the green, harassing people. But the truth is, important as it is morally and environmentally in terms of land use, it's actually, and big as it is in terms of total emissions, it's really a small part of our individual emissions. So, Pat, I know you still eat meat. Not anymore? Okay, well, don't feel too guilty. Feel guilty, but not too guilty. Okay, let's talk about the big picture then. And I think the first thing to think about is how much progress have we made since 2005? Oh, this table sort of summarizes all the big changes. The total change over the years between 2005 and 2018 was an increase of 3 megatons. That is, we lost ground during this period when we were fighting to achieve what Harper promised. We lost ground. There was one big win. At the national level, phasing out coal, mostly in Ontario, knocked off 55 megatons. And then expansion of the oil industry, mostly in Alberta, added 43 megatons. The next biggest item was an expansion of road transportation, which added 24 megatons. And after that, you're down to halocarbons with 7.9. Halocarbons are the various refrigerants used in, well, refrigerators and air conditioners. And a few other things. They're used in some spray bottles and so on. The big ones, well, it's pretty clear that if we have a target, it has to be destroy the fossil fuel industry. That's got to be the biggest one. We're going backwards. I think the Greens have to start saying, we know we have to kill the fossil fuel industry quickly. Yes, we want a just transition and so on, but let's not pretend. Alberta is irresponsible. They are criminals. The government is currently criminal. They got to turn around and start figuring out how to close down all that production. I don't care. They can produce all the oil they want as long as they don't produce carbon dioxide. That's the target. I don't care. Take it out of the ground, send it somewhere if you want, get money for it, but you're not allowed to produce carbon dioxide. And if that means you can't produce, okay, you're dead. It's pretty simple. At this point, I'd like to just make a comment about carbon capture. The Alberta oil sands are really interested in it. It would save hundreds of trillions of dollars for the oil industry if they could carbon capture cheaply. Be a huge profit maker. So how come they haven't put billions of dollars into carbon capture technology? The fossil fuel people don't believe it'll ever be economic on a significant scale. Or they would have done it. It would have saved their entire industry. It's way too big a prize. If they're not doing it, it's not worth anyone else putting money into that project. Okay, let's go on here. We've been losing ground. Alberta and vehicles are the criminals. Let's take a look at the sectors and just emphasize that. 26% of all the emissions just come from oil and gas production. 25% come from transportation. Those are the biggies. Currently, electric cars will probably take out a third of that transportation, maybe half of it by 2035 if we really accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles. So that's great. It's not enough by a long ways. And if the oil and gas industry does not shrink, you guys are going to have to carry a huge load. You know, you're going to have to stop eating, I think. No more meat, no more crackers either. So let's look at the political targets. I've got another list. This is another incomplete list. If we had time, we could spend a lot of time building a bigger list, but I built a list to show you how I would think about this. I've ticked off a couple that we've already discussed: carbon taxes, border adjustment tax. And then we get into things like there are people who are most committed to fighting pipelines. They often committed for reasons other than carbon, because it infringes on Aboriginal rights, because it makes a mess on the landscape, not because of carbon, but carbon is part of that story. So that's a legitimate one. We have as part of our policy removing oil subsidies, as Mr. Trudeau had as part of his policy, just incidentally. We could campaign for veganism. We could follow Bill Gates's advice and put a lot of money into learning to make carbon-free concrete. It's a good idea. We could expropriate the gas distributors so they'd stop campaigning against getting rid of the gas industry. The most effective resistance to cutting natural gas consumption turns out to be gas companies. Enbridge, does anybody have an Enbridge account? You're dependent on Enbridge. I'm dependent on Enbridge. And guess what? They're busy down there arguing for the expansion of the natural gas network and against any consideration that they have to be cut back. In Texas, it was gas companies that were and are fighting tooth and nail to stop municipalities from saying you can't install gas furnaces in new homes. Well, we have to say you can't install gas furnaces in new homes. There isn't any choice. So again, Pat, I hate to pick on you, but you're contributing money to the enemy of the people. Anyway, let's look at that list. It's just too long, right? So what we know is we need to pick some items. Maybe they're all on this list, maybe they're not. And it depends on us sort of agreeing on some items. And the question is which ones. And we really want targets that have a big impact, that are politically feasible. We have some chance of winning them while we're still alive, or preferably in the next couple of years. And if we win and they become policy, they actually can be implemented. And that's not the same thing as being politically feasible. So this is all important because each win builds some momentum. This is why Enbridge is dragging its feet, because a win there is a big win. And it gets harder and harder for all the rest of the industry to resist. So what do we have? Let's see if I can go on. How come I'm not going on? Where's my... There we go. So I've been thinking, and this is what I've been thinking. Now, it may look like I've got a blue bubble bath, but what I've done is I've asked which items are possibly a quick win. Now, that's a matter of opinion, but for example, I think under the circumstances, a border adjustment tax is quite possibly a quick win. And if it's a win, it's pretty easy, darn it, sorry. It's pretty easy to implement federally. I don't mean it'll happen in 3 years. It'll take about 4 or 5 years to implement, but it's quite feasible to start it and finish it and not have a tremendous amount of technical problems or organizational problems get in the way, or political opposition once the decision is made. And I would argue that that's one of the big wins, because it makes a uniform high carbon tax attractive. It puts pressure on other countries, which we're not doing right now. Because what we're saying is, if you don't put a carbon tax on, we're going to collect it and give it to our people. A lot of countries wouldn't like that. It's a win for our people, but it's not for whoever doesn't have a carbon tax. So that's big for that reason. So you've got the logic of this. Down in the bottom there, I think it would be pretty easy to get a government to say, we're going to develop hemp power. I've got some friends who keep insisting that hemp is the answer to everything. I don't know what they're smoking, but I would argue that, first of all, that's a small gain. That's why it's small. And and also black. Black means not a very big gain, probably. It's easy to get a win, but in practice, it's almost impossible to make much progress with it. Plant hemp on all the highways or something. Okay, what about other ones? Electricity use is in that low range. Everybody pretty much agrees we should economize on electricity. Not going to have much effect because we've already introduced a lot of efficiencies. And efficiencies have this nice curve. If you keep taking off 10% of what's left, the gain is smaller and smaller. Yes, there are gains in electricity, but electric efficiency is not a place where we're going to get much gain. It's also really hard work to do it once you get down to where we already are. Veganism would be really a big one. So you see it over there in the bottom? It says, it's supposed to say campaign for veganism. Well, it would make a big difference. It's not likely to be a quick win. What, Jen? Sorry. And pretty hard to get people to actually cooperate anyway. So that's why that one's down there. Those are my assessments. You might have different assessments. We might, if we sat down and discussed these, start moving these balls around. Retrofitting homes is a big win. There's a lot of agreement about it, but not much money in it right now. It's moderately hard to implement, but it has a big effect. So if we go to here, that's that. Sorry again. Planting trees is in the same area. Unfortunately, my assessment is that there's really small gains from planting trees. It's a distraction. Yeah, you can get agreement pretty easily. Easy to send people out to plant a bunch of trees. Most of them won't live. They'll take a long time to get established and take much carbon out of the atmosphere. It's a good idea. It's not a big immediate win in terms of impact. Outlawing gas furnaces, though, is. Once you say you can't build without gas furnaces, you get a bunch of synergies. Industry develops even better and cheaper heat pumps, and heat pumps are already comparable in price. They just have a big upfront cost. That is one of the biggest chunks we could get. I think that's one that we should be talking about. So you've got these three things now: border adjustment tax, gas furnaces, retrofitting homes, outlawing internal combustion engines. It's getting to the point where that's feasible. By the way, that's up there near gas furnaces, up near the top in the middle. Getting to the point where people might agree to doing that. The Brits have done it. Other countries have done it. We could do it. It'd be a lot of screaming, but it's feasible. It's really easy to implement. It's just a legislative change. You say in 2030, no more cars. Yeah. Janet's just telling me that I'm running way past my time. So I actually am happy to stop there. Oil subsidies, politically hard, pretty big impact, technically easy to do. It's the political opposition. I'd like to go through these all in great detail with everybody and learn what you think about them and refine this. But what I think I've done here is started to lay out a framework for really thinking seriously as a group about which targets are the big ones, and for explaining to other people why we think that. It's true that all the numbers I put in there, you know where they came from? Off the top of my head, or at least my reasonably informed, I hope, judgment, but they're just my guesses. So I think there's some real value in finding some way to work on things like this collectively and in a serious way. But that's all my time. You've been very patient and tolerant of my rambling. So, oh dear. I have one more slide and it didn't come up. And what it says is that's all, folks. So I'm done. Comments, questions?
Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, David. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, of course. It's Andy.
And
uh, David and I, excuse me, David and I have known each other for a very long time. I was actually one of his students in late in life. And I was, at that time, I was also heading forward the energy efficiency program for the mining sector, for INCO, for the mining sector, and then also working and establishing a baseline for climate change, which made for some very interesting discussions and pastimes. The proposal that David is putting forward, I support, but I think what we need to really discuss with that is that everything we have done so far has always followed that, well, we're going to complain about this, or we don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want this. My whole perspective is from the area that we need to provide opportunity and let the opportunity be the weapon to dismantle the oil and gas industry. Quick hits for things. He mentioned about geothermal. Geothermal has one of the greatest potentials of eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. I would suggest that if you want a quick hit real quickly, is tell everyone that's on layoff in Alberta to take all those drills and start drilling holes from Alberta to the west coast, from Alberta to the east coast, and put the pipes in the ground. Environmentally, we're not taking anything out of the ground. We're not putting anything into the ground or taking anything out except the heat. The water meeting that we're using to transfer the heat is recirculated. So basically is that they drill a hole, put a pipe in, move on, somebody connects to it, puts a greenhouse on top of it. That's how we can do that. And we can develop the technology to do that in every house, in every community. I'll give an example of how easy this could be done. If you can imagine Sudbury, the surface of Sudbury, the map of Sudbury, think of if we were to superlay the underground workings of the mining sector on top of where Sudbury is right now, how quick access we would have to an unlimited source of energy, period. You ask any miner in Sudbury if it's hot underground, and they'll choke you because it's unbearably hot underground. But yet in the same breath, up on surface, we're putting pipelines in, we're pumping natural gas. There's no reason for that. But anyways, on that perspective, like for the Green Party, I say everything that David has mentioned here, let's look at it from a perspective of providing opportunities for people and use that for a quick hit and for opportunities. So let's look at opportunities. Like you said, like planting trees, I say it's an opportunity. I'm more of the fact is the problem is it's planting trees is nice, but if we were to manage our forests, we get 10 times the hit. So let's provide opportunities for all the kids and everything like that want to get some experience, or someone that wants an opportunity. Here, you can work in a forest, and to manage it, no more, no less, just thin it out and take care of it. And essentially is that my question to David is that how can we turn everything that he said to provide opportunities rather than complaining that, well, we got to cut the pipelines, we got to get them to stop drilling for oil. If you get them, the way you stop getting drilling for oil is you use those machines to drill for geothermal because there's no machine available anymore, and they're employed. That kind of nonsense, I would say that comes out that we would get known for.
Yep, I agree with you, but you know I agree with you, Andy. So maybe someone else will agree with you and make you feel good. I can't really help having agreed so many times. Other comments or remarks? If you said something, Pat, I couldn't hear you. There's a mute button on the bottom left of your screen, the one that shows us all, the very bottom left corner.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Can't hear you now.
I was wondering how large the carbon fee has to be. Can you hear that? No. Okay. Whatever I'm doing is not.
You're breaking up. We're losing you. There's a weak link here. Someone's a weak link. I think what I'll do is I'll turn off my camera. Maybe other people could do the same for a bit, and maybe Pat will come through more clearly. Want to try again, Pat? I didn't hear anything. I'm sorry.
Pat, you're still on mute.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Much better, yes.
Okay. I was wondering how large our carbon fee has to be before we can compete with electricity, with electric heat and electric cars and stuff. Do you have any idea?
It's a really interesting question. And it different parts, but because so little of our power in Ontario is actually carbon-based, the carbon fee is not going to be decisive. It's electricity prices that are decisive. And electricity prices currently are set to pay off past debts. Now, everybody talks about let's make sure we buy the cheapest scheme and let's not expand it and let's be very business-like and we don't want to lose money on electricity. Well, when things are business as usual, you worry about essentially business things like how much you're making or whether your electricity company makes a profit. In a war, basically you worry about whether you survive. My view is that we basically have to say, look, we know we need to triple electricity production to replace gas, to replace the transportation, to replace the gas that's used in producing concrete and iron and steel in the country and in the province. And if that means that we've got to produce a whole bunch of electricity that before the demand is there, and we've got to sell it at a loss, I think we should just do that. We should just go flat out to oversupply electricity so the price crashes and simply accept that that's the cost of staying alive.
I agree.
Okay.
David, it's,
Yes.
Gary Boda. Hi.
Hi. Oh,
Just-
Gary. Hi.
Hi. There's so many. I'm just keeping my picture off, I guess, but I can put my picture on. There's so many areas, so many things that can be done. I mean, when you look at the UK, and because they've put good governance and rules in, I mean, they've dropped their levels 40%. So shouldn't we be really targeting that? Like, we really need a 2025 report card. I mean, this idea of leaving it to 2030 isn't.
You're completely right.
And you know, so if you have that, that's going to drive all these other things. Otherwise, we're kind of stuck, you know, pushing a little bit here on geothermal, a little bit here on this, a little bit on that. It just gets noisy, you know, instead of concentrating. Because I think you're right, we need the carbon fee. and we need the border tax adjustments, but we need to see progress as well. And so we have to force government to, come forward and have 2025 targets and reporting by an independent group, which they seem to be
Completely
fighting
right.
for some reason.
Yep.
And just a real quick comment on the electricity things, because we've got an off-peak hydro system, so we collect it at time of use. But I can tell you, our bill is still $6,500 a year for electricity, and we don't keep it warm. And we've got a heat pump that just went, and so now we have $17,000 worth of heat pump and heat exchanger that needs to be replacing. So to get the costs down, or where people can afford it, it's going to take we got to ban fossil fuel gas use, and there's a lot of health reasons for that. I mean, the asthma rates are double to triple in households that cook with gas. So I mean, just using that as a reason to get rid of gas fire or stovetops is a good reason. But I mean, so I would say really push for the 2025 reporting targets and keep it there.
Yeah. The big impact of a high carbon tax in terms of the goals I would set is exactly on natural gas. Doubling the cost of natural gas makes the formula look quite different for you.
Mm-hmm.
Doubling the cost of natural gas and halving the price of electricity means it's an absolute no-brainer even here. And I think that that's what we ought to be talking about. I know that doesn't sound very businesslike, to take a loss on your electricity, but I mean, you invest, and this is an investment. I would say maybe if you want to be cheap, what you say is anybody who puts in a heat pump pays nothing for electricity or half of the price for the next 10 years. Something like that would make a huge difference to the incentives. If you then push the gas price up a lot, I think you get a lot of change fast, but you've got to do something like that.
And I think they're looking at that in BC, aren't they? Vancouver and elsewhere. Their Axe the Gas sort of campaigns are starting up. So they are trying to limit gas in new developments.
Yeah. Anyway, those are really good remarks, Gary, both of them, really helpful. I agree with you about report cards. We know why they're not doing a report card, because they don't have a clue what they're doing yet. They haven't got a plan yet. All they have is what seemed to them as a pretty daring increase in the carbon price.
Right.
Should have been $25 a year, not 15, minimum $25 a year, which would have taken us up over 200 by the time we got to 2030. And that would have made people want to switch a lot sooner. But they're afraid to. They're still responding to the signals they got 2 years ago. And they haven't figured out where we are today, in my view.
That's a good point about the bringing up the carbon tax up to as high as possible, because again, what that does is provides the opportunities for us to do something. Like he has a geothermal pump. How much cheaper will that be with the price of carbon going up so high? He becomes very, very competitive. And as that happens, then the future price falls down for this equipment. So that's the kind of integration of positions that the Green Party needs to undertake, is that we're moving from here to here, but we're also doing it in an efficient manner. We're doing it in an environmentally sane manner, and even financially, you can make a business case for it. We have companies, green companies, that could be profitable at this and still meet all those other criteria.
Yep. the scale issue with heat pumps is kind of interesting because there are two different experiences in Europe. The Swiss and the Germans have installed a lot of heat pumps, and the cost has gone down. The manufacturing cost has gone down, and the installation cost. The British have installed a lot of heat pumps, and the cost has gone down for manufacturing heat pumps. But the cost of installing them actually went up so much that the overall cost of heat pumps went up in Britain. And the suggestion is that that's difficulties with their labor force, which is unionized, and their bureaucracy, which won't let you do this, that, and the other, and you have to get 40 permits to do it, and so on. And as soon as you start crowding that system, the costs rise. I don't have a clearer idea how it happened, but I have seen the sort of scale studies for heat pumps in those two sets of locations. And so it's, Andy's right, but predicting that in Canada, the price will come down. Well, it hasn't come down in the States for pretty much the same reason as in Britain. It's not quite as bad, I gather, but in the US, difficulty in getting trained labor, responsible tradespeople who can do it, getting it accepted by the building code, and so on and so on and so on, is much higher than in the European states. And maybe we're more like that. Maybe we're sort of incompetent at these technologies.
Well, David, you have to think about it in terms of also of capacity. One of the biggest problems we see, I'll use a pandemic as an absolute clue as to what goes on. Because of the pandemic, you cannot buy a sheet of plywood. 2x4s are $8 a piece. Everybody wants to do it, so the demand is so high that there's no efficiencies to be gained. And this is where I say the opportunities are there, but they need to be embraced. They need to be in a competitive market with adequate supply, and these are built up as we go along. But to go from today to tomorrow to do this, there's no numbers. And I think one of the biggest things that I think about is that look at the guys that have invested trillions of dollars in natural gas pipelines, oil and gas pipelines. They are your biggest foe, because I am not going to lose a dime of this money because you want to shut down the natural gas pipeline or whatever. Say, no, you keep on going as long as you want, because the competition is not going to be the pipeline anymore. The competition will be to get the geothermal, to get the renewable energies. There's a business case to be made right now that you could run an entire geothermal hothouse to grow your fruits and vegetables. I would ask, how many truckers don't want to be truckers anymore and want to grow fruits and vegetables in hothouses? And the point is that you would get the financing. You could probably get the financing to get your business case, and you could tell the financing people is that these people are paying a lot higher interest than the oil and gas sector is paying for their stuff, because they're so huge. You're paying a few percentages more, but that's just an extra cost, but still gives you your business case.
Yeah, I'd be curious if Fred or Janet have any comments before we wind up here. I went longer than I was supposed to.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. We're talking about the need to have a higher carbon fee. And if we understood better how a revenue neutral carbon tax actually facilitates and supports the economy, maybe then it'd be easier to get the fee raised. And I had a discussion with you last week over the phone about those things. Now I have a bit written out if anybody wants to hear it.
If anybody wants these slides, by the way, if I get your email, I'll send you the slides. If anybody else uses the program R, the statistics program R, I'll even send you the thing that I generated the diagram with, and you can put your own numbers in. Or I'll send you my numbers and you can change them in a spreadsheet if you like, and we'll see what your judgment would look like. It's actually quite easy to add more balls or take the ones off you're not interested in. It's just, it's working with Excel.
For Fred, while I really would have liked to hear what you wrote down, we
Oh.
are over time and we do have to end this this session.
Okay, I could probably put it in an email if anybody's interested.
That would be great if you could do that, and we could even distribute it if you like.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I want to thank David for joining us and for taking the time this busy time of year when I'm sure there's a lot of assignments coming in and you're having to mark and exams and so on. Thank you so much for taking the time to address us. You gave us a lot to think about. I like the idea of us coming up with those few things that we want to push together, push the cart forward, as they say. If we're all pulling in the same direction, that tends to work a little bit better. Anyway, thanks again. And thank you to everybody who participated. We're glad we had such a great audience. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Gary, too.
Bye, David.
Bye. Good job.